Beyging lýsingarorða, declension of adjectives. Samtal 1. Hver þetta? Hver þetta? Þetta vinur minn. Hann heitir Björn. Hann mjög hávaxinn. En hver þetta? Þetta Eva, vinkona mín. Hún mjög klók. En hver þetta hér? Þetta barnið hennar. Það mjög glatt. Já, greinilega. As we've seen in the pronoun system, Icelandic has 3 grammatical genders: kallkyn, kvenkyn, and hvorugkyn. Adjectives inflect for gender. This means their ending changes depending on the gender of the person or object being described. Here we see the rules for adjectives that end in ur or The kallkyn, masculine, is the dictionary form, and we don't need to make any changes. Veikur, þreyttur, mjór, stór, glaður. For the kvenkyn, feminine, the main rule is that we remove the ending. For adjectives ending in ur, this is straightforward. Veik, þreytt. For adjectives ending in it's a bit trickier. Sometimes this is a removable ending, and sometimes it's part of the stem of the adjective and can't be removed. So compare mjór and stór, which become mjó and stór, respectively. This is something you just have to learn for each adjective ending in The other thing to note for feminine adjectives is the possibility of a vowel change known as the U-shift. This involves R changing to as in glöð, and will be explained in detail in a couple of slides' time. For the hvorugkyn, neuter, we remove the ending and add t. So veikur becomes veikt. If the stem of the adjective already ends in double T, we don't add another, so þreyttur would just be þreytt with 2 T's. If the stem ends in a vowel, as in mjór, then we would double the T, giving mjótt. Note the aspiration, the little puff of air before the T. For stór, the is part of the stem and can't be removed, so we keep the stem as it is and simply add T to give stórt. Finally, for glaður, we follow the rule as prescribed, but we have to apply an additional phonological rule or sound rule. Icelandic doesn't like D or eð coming before a T, so if we have a situation where that would appear to be required, we drop the D or the eð and we double the T. This takes us to glatt. These inflections might appear to be idiosyncratic or irregular at first glance, but in fact they are all following regular rules. The only truly idiosyncratic feature here is whether or not adjectives ending in drop that in the feminine or neuter. All the other changes are systematic and predictable. This slide shows the rules for adjectives that end in nn, etl, and in. For nn and etl, the rules are the same as for adjectives that end in We just take off the ending in the feminine, and for the neuter we add the T. The thing is that actually only the second consonant is a removable ending. The first one always stays. So grein with 2 N's becomes grein with 1 N in the feminine and greint in the neuter. Listen carefully to the difference in pronunciation. Grein, grein, greint. Gamall becomes gömul in the feminine, so we've removed the ending and applied the U-shift as we have an R in the stem. And gamalt in the neuter. The exceptional group here is adjectives that end in. These are normally derived from past participles of verbs. In the feminine, they follow the rule of removing the ending, i.e. one N. So, hálvaxin and opin. Note that there's no difference in pronunciation here. Hálvaxin in the masculine, hálvaxin in the feminine. In the neuter, they differ in that instead of getting T, the N is simply replaced with eð. So all adjectives in this group behave this way, giving us hálvaxið and opið. Knowing which part of the adjective counts as the removable ending can be tricky. Some examples are shown here. The most unpredictable group is adjectives that end in er, but all the others are pretty consistent. Let's look again at the sound rule for adjectives whose stem ends in d or eð. As we mentioned before, you can't have d or eð next to a t in Icelandic. This is really about pronunciation. It's almost impossible to pronounce the d or eð before a t. Hrædd, glavt. It doesn't really work. Instead, we drop the d or eð and double the t. Hrætt, glatt. This is not just limited to adjectives. We'll see this rule again in verbs and other word classes, so look out for it. U-shift is another sound process in Icelandic that is regular and predictable. It affects all word classes, adjectives, nouns, and verbs, but here we will focus on how it appears in adjectives. The basic rule of U-shift is that when we have an R in stress position, i.e. the first syllable of a word, it changes to under the influence of a U in the following syllable, as in glöð. If we have multiple R's followed by an then the first one changes to and the subsequent ones change to as in gömul. Immediately you may ask, where is the U causing this vowel shift? Well, unfortunately in feminine adjectives it has disappeared. It used to be there many hundreds of years ago, but was dropped and left behind this vowel change. In other contexts, like in verbs, we can often still see the U that causes the shift, but we have no such luck here. So let's have a look at how this works. So we start with glaður, and the first thing we need to do to make it feminine is to remove the ending. Now, remember I said that there used to be a U here on the end, which would be the reason that we have the U shift. So U causes the R to change to but what happened, as we said before, is that U has since disappeared from the end of the word, which leaves us with glöð. So this is U shift, although we can't see the U that causes it anymore. So how does it work in gamall? In gamall, well, we need to do the same thing first of all. We need to remove the ending to give us gamall. That's our stem that we need to work with. And then we have that U on the end that has since disappeared, but that's what causes our first U shift. So the R closest to the U changes to U. The reason it changes to U is because it's not in a stressed syllable, it's not in the first syllable. The thing is that we now have another R next to an U, so we get a kind of chain reaction here, and that U causes the first R to change, but instead of changing to U, it changes to because that R was in the stress position in the first syllable. So that gives us gömul. For now, it might just be helpful to think of this as a feature of feminine adjectives that have an R in their stem. One more thing, if the R is followed by any other vowel, then the U shift is blocked. So fallegur, if we're making it feminine, would become falleg and not falleg. So that E blocks the U shift from reaching the R. Final thing to note is that the U shift only affects plain R. Á, as in klár, is not affected. So hann klár, hún klár. And au is not affected either. So hann rauður, hún rauð. To finish off, we have some small words that will help you build more complex sentences. First, we have samtengingar, conjunctions. These can be used to link a chain of adjectives together. So we have og, and. Jón hávaxinn og mjór. We have en, but. María þreytt en glöð. And then we have eða, or. Barnið hrætt eða veikt. Then we have atviksorð, adverbs. These go just before the adjective. Ekki, not. Ég ekki sterkur. Smá, a little bit. Þú ert smá reiður. Frekar, quite. Hún frekar lágvaxin. Mjög, very. Tröllið mjög ljótt.